Welcome everybody to a breaking news edition of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host Jordan Hill. Got Ben Wolk and Kipp Adams with me on this Monday night, and Jared Curtis is set to be a Georgia Bulldog. The Bulldogs win out in a very fierce competition on the recruiting trail against Oregon. Get a very elite quarterback out of the state of Tennessee. We're going to talk about what put Georgia over the line and helped them land Jared Curtis, what we think of Jared Curtis, what this means for the rest of Georgia's 2026 class. Just a very big episode. We hope you guys will hang around. Subscribe to dogs247.com. Please go to our YouTube, Dogs247. Go to the TikTok. Go to wherever you get your podcast. The Junkyard Dawgcast will be there. It's going to be a fun episode. Hope y'all will hang around. Welcome back to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast, a breaking news episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Ben Wolk and Kipp Adams with me on this Monday night, and we are talking about Georgia quarterback commit Jared Curtis, the five-star quarterback from Nashville, Tennessee, commits to Georgia on Monday night, picks Georgia over fellow finalist Oregon. A big-time commitment for the Bulldogs, getting the 6'4", 225-pound quarterback in its 2026 class. Going to go all out on Jared Curtis in this episode. We're going to talk about the decision. We're going to talk about what it means for Georgia. We're going to talk about what we like about Jared Curtis's game and what we're watching for once he eventually gets to Athens. So big time breaking news episode, but that's what happens when Georgia lands the quarterback in its 2026 class. So let's start with how this thing played out. We knew that there were two schools standing at the end of this recruitment. Jared Curtis gets ready to announce his commitment. First, let's shout out Jared Curtis, man. He sat right down and got to work. No hat flips, no big video. I mean, he just sat down and made it clear he was going to be a dog. Ben, tell us about how this recruitment played out and what you think put Georgia over the top when it came time for Jared Curtis to make a decision.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say, Jordan. For all the pizzazz and buzz and concern and anxiety that there was around this recruitment, dating back to the first time that he committed through his decommitment and all the way around this one and kind of the month or so lead up into his commitment date, he really didn't make too much of a spiel about it when he got up there today. It was, let's cut to Jared. Let's say our thank yous to both coaches, and let's commit to Georgia and show everybody the Georgia gear that they had on. Huge pickup for Georgia. Like there's no other way to put it other than this is a significant win for Georgia, and especially Georgia offensive coordinator Mike Bobo. One of the immediate pieces of feedback that I got following this news was, make sure you give Mike Bobo his flowers on this one from someone inside the building, because this is a guy that has dealt with a lot of heat over the last, however long, probably more time than I was even going to say right there. And this is a recruitment that was important for him and for Georgia to be able to get. This was a guy that Georgia identified as their quarterback one in this 2026 recruiting cycle. This was someone that when he committed to them, they were all in on Jared Curtis. And when he decommitted in October, it put Georgia in a tight, another vulnerable quarterback recruiting spot. And it was, we talk about it a lot. It's not often you see recommitments in college football, and there's a reason for that, because you don't decommit in the first place if you haven't fallen out of love with that place, or you don't feel like there's other options that you might be more attracted to. And so it was almost, doubly difficult for Mike Bobo to get Jared Curtis committed the second time around, because Jared Curtis was obviously looking for any reason necessary to not commit to Georgia after he stepped off that commitment the first time. We'll talk more about who Jared Curtis is as a player, but I think you're looking at 6'4", 220 pounds, super strong arm, he will step into Georgia's quarterback room and immediately be the most talented player in the room. Now, does that mean that you're going to be the starting quarterback day one? I don't necessarily think that I expect that to be likely, but he's going to have every physical advantage over everybody else in that room. And that's really not a slight on what is still a talented room. It's just, I mean, Jared Curtis is a big, strong, physical, powerful, athletic runner of the football and can make any pass that you need him to. And so there's a reason why Mike Bobo prioritized him as quarterback one in this class. And there's a reason why this is going to be celebrated as such a meaningful recruitment in Athens.
Looking at Jared Curtis coming off a really productive season, completed 70.2% of his pass attempts, 2,830 yards, 40 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, also rushed for 637 yards and 18 touchdowns. He was named Mr. Football in Tennessee for his classification. Really talented guy. We are going to talk about his skill set and what we like in a little bit. But Kipp, just what's your immediate reaction to the news? Like Ben said, it's not often that we see a guy commit to a school, decommit. He winds up coming back around to Georgia. What'd you think of Jared Curtis and Georgia winning out here?
Yeah, there's been months of just pure doom scrolling from Georgia fans, just setting themselves up for Oregon to win this recruitment, one of several recruitments where these two programs are battling. And I mean, that makes sense. Like, you look at the program Dan Lanning has built, and now in the NIL era, everyone thinks he's got the unlimited checkbook. He's the new, up and coming coach, set to really just thrive and with all the funding and the backers that they have at Oregon, the Nike money. I mean, we've talked about it. How is little old Kirby Smart going to compete against the next dynasty in college football? And well, by beating them on the recruiting trail over and over again. And that's kind of what Kirby Smart's done so far in these head-to-head battles. He's done really well against Dan Lanning. Lanning's not there yet. Also on the field, did pretty well against Oregon so far. So you can't really, if you're going to talk about Oregon as being that next program, you also just have to credit Kirby Smart's program in Georgia for continuing to just do what it does, which is win these elite recruitments, continue to build its roster through the high school ranks, which is what Kirby Smart's tried to focus on, and finding, Mike Bobo has always been a guy who will find his quarterback early on in the cycle, kind of lock in and make sure he gets that guy. Last cycle, we kind of saw you also have to just prepare, for any curveballs that could be thrown your way, especially with the transfer portal now and with quarterbacks, the way they're evaluating rosters. They see another quarterback commit, they might go in a different direction. And when, Matt Zollers made his announcement, he already saw Jared Curtis on Georgia's commitment list. Georgia had to make sure they had another guy on their board in Ryan Montgomery that they really liked. This time around, they're able to get Jared Curtis back in the fold with Ryan Montgomery on campus now. You still have to win these recruiting battles, knowing you've already got high school guys that are in your program now, trying to, learn the system and everything. That's not easy. But Georgia lands an elite quarterback and continues to stockpile the talent in that room. I think as of right now, he's the second highest rated quarterback that Georgia's landed, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite. So, an elite talent that, again, this is that time of the year where you look at where Georgia is in those team recruiting rankings. They move from the mid-20s to the late teens. Screenshot the class. I think that's probably is the last time Georgia will be in the 20s, and probably still the lowest they're going to be this recruiting cycle in the rankings is where they're at right now.
Georgia now with 8 commits in the 2026 class. And I want to make sure before we kind of talk about Jared Curtis and his skill set, I know there's going to be plenty of Georgia fans listening to this, watching this, saying, okay, well, he committed on Cinco de Mayo, but we got a long way to go. I want to throw it back to you, Ben. How confident are you that this thing is done with Jared Curtis, that he's going to stick with his commitment and that Georgia's locked in here? He's so scared to give an answer that he's muted, which is just.
I'll say this. I don't need that right now, Jordan. All right. What I'll say is we've lived through the Dylan Raiola experience. So I feel like we're probably more gun shy than any other team site out there to sit here moments after a commitment and outright say he's going to be locked in and there's no changing off of this one. That said, I'm going to probably do the irresponsible thing here and say I would be stunned to see Jared Curtis anywhere other than Georgia at the end of this signing class. I mean, this was a meticulously managed recruitment really from October and when he decommitted from Georgia until now, when it came from how, his agency represented him, how he handled getting the message out on certain visits. Everything that came along with it was a much more, mature recruitment, I guess you could say, than we're accustomed to now that we're in this, agent recruiting world. And so because of that, I would be surprised. That said, I guess you could probably make the case that because of that, maybe it's more likely to happen because those types of things could happen in the 11th hour at the end, but I don't really see that happening. Now, what I will say is, I just talked earlier, Mike Bobo is a massive reason for why Jared Curtis chose Georgia. I would say he is the number one reason probably why Jared Curtis chose Georgia. And we also are not naive to the conversation that has gone on with Mike Bobo and all of that. And, I think this is a moment that Mike Bobo should be celebrated. This is why you want Mike Bobo on your staff, because he does have the ability to land and build relationships with elite quarterback recruits. He's shown that throughout his career, both times as Georgia's offensive coordinator and in between that as well. That said, Georgia's offense has to perform this season for there not to be ongoing questions about anything related to Georgia's offense. And so I guess there's always that out where if, things were to go south, it could go, that could change the relationship there. But me, I'm a strong advocate of Mike Bobo and what he's capable of and what I think this offense is going to be capable of this season. And so, I have little doubt on May 5th that this Jared Curtis commitment is as solid as you're going to find.
All right, Ben, let's talk about Jared Curtis, the prospect, what his talents are, what he is bringing to Georgia. And I will let you talk first, Ben. And as you do that, for the folks who are watching this on YouTube, we will pull up some of his highlights. This is from his sophomore season, but I'll turn it over to you, Ben, and you kind of tell us what stands out to you about him as a prospect.
Well, like some of the things that I mentioned earlier, 6'4", 220, somewhere between 215, 225, depending on where he's at or where you're seeing him listed at. But I mean, this is a big body, physical quarterback. And I mean, quite frankly, Georgia hasn't had a whole lot of guys with this skill set. I mean, because we're in the Georgia world, you're probably going to get a lot of Matthew Stafford conversation just because he was a Mike Bobo guy and he was a bigger, stronger arm type of guy. I think that Jared's even a little bit different from that, just in terms of his natural mobility and some things like that. What's interesting with Jared is we don't know exactly yet how he's going to respond to elite competition. I mean, he plays in a lower level private classification in Tennessee, and he's the best athlete on every football field that he steps onto. Like if Nashville Christian wanted him to be their starting safety or starting middle linebacker, or even their starting edge rusher, like he could easily do that for them just with his athletic build and skill set. I think that there's a reason why Georgia went the extra mile to make sure that they landed Jared Curtis not just once, but twice in this recruiting cycle. They think that highly of him as a prospect, and talking with his quarterback trainer, Thomas Morris at QB Country Nashville, he says that this is the strongest guy that he's ever worked with at the quarterback position. And he's worked with some dudes like Daniel Jones and I'm trying to think some other people that he's worked with in the past as well, but big physical future NFL type of quarterbacks that he's worked with. And he says that Jared Curtis is the strongest of them all. It's a super lofty comparison, and he even acknowledged how lofty it is, but he brought up Josh Allen's name when he was talking about Jared Curtis because he just thinks that's what you see when you throw on the tape with Jared. And beyond just what the film shows you, some of the intangible stuff when it comes to toughness and competitiveness and work ethic and all of those types of things all fit in line with what he's heard about Josh Allen as well. And so I think that's why you're going to see that comp. But yeah, this is a guy that Georgia thinks has future All-American ability, and there's a reason why he is the top quarterback on the board and why it was so important to them to land him.
Yeah, just from what I've seen, big arm, really impressed with just his arm strength, his ability to throw downfield. Watching these highlights before we started recording, he's got very good accuracy. There's a few passes on this highlight reel where, I mean, he is putting it through some tight windows, very accurate. Not a lot of changing of the arm slot that I've seen, but he does have that capability. One thing that I've enjoyed seeing in this highlight, he's got the play action down. He is comfortable. Kind of want to see him pull the David Green. If you guys remember that back in the day, he could just hang back there in the pocket and he wasn't scared. And another thing that's not necessarily this huge, like, oh, this makes him a 5-star. There's a couple plays on here where there's a bad snap. And, man, he's just kind of cool, calm, and collected, gets the ball and makes a play. He's got athleticism. I think it would be a stretch to call him a true dual threat because, again, like Ben said, the biggest question to me about Jared Curtis is the competition. And he's going to face a huge step up in competition. But I really like this pickup for Georgia. I think he's a guy that, I'll have a column on Monday night just sort of talking about what's next for Georgia now that they've got Jared Curtis. But I think he's coming into a good situation in the fact that, more likely than not, he's not going to be looked at as a true freshman starter. He's not going to be thrown into the fire. And I think that's to his benefit. I think that being able to learn behind some veteran guys, being able to kind of sit back and learn behind a Mike Bobo, I think the tools are there. I just think it's a matter of, learning, growing with the level of difficulty going up significantly. I think it's a pickup Georgia fans should be excited about. Kipp, what about you? What has sort of caught your attention from Jared Curtis's highlights and just his physical ability?
Well, I will say that the level of competition does stand out a little bit. He's had time to throw a lot of the times, and you look at the pass rushers. He looks like he could be blocking some of those pass rushers at times. But the biggest thing for me is that his decision making has really made a big stride. And that's really what you want to look for, not just from the sophomore or junior season, which we're watching the sophomore highlights now, but junior to senior season, you want to see them continue to make steps in their decision making. It's one of the best, quarterback eval data points you can really take. And he's already taken such a huge step. Just going from 56% to over 70%, a lot more play under center, a lot more play action instead of rolling him out and splitting the field, forcing him to actually read the entire field and also not play hero ball. I mean, when you have that kind of arm, you just think, well, I can make any throw possible. I can thread the needle. I can layer the ball, which he can do incredibly well, but you also just have to still take care of the football. And he did a much better job of that and throwing a catchable ball his junior season. So I think the strides he's made in that really stand out to me. And the fact that I think he is going to continue to gain strength and get stronger, which is going to help him with the build he already has, just stay healthy throughout a season. Because if they're going to use him like a Josh Allen, if they're going to use him as a guy who can run and have run plays called for him, he's going to take hits in the SEC, some big time hits. And I just think that if he comes in and he's playing at 6'3", 235, they're going to be able to just open up the entire playbook, knowing that he's going to be able to take these hits and play 15, 16 games. So I just think that's a real big thing for what he's bringing to the table, just that physical build, along with the arm talent, along with the ability to continue to progress as a decision maker and to throw a catchable ball. So it's an incredible package and something that makes a lot of sense for a Georgia offense that was at its best when it was using Stetson Bennett to extend plays and to open up the entire playbook in that manner. And I think he kind of brings that to the table with obviously an exceptional arm talent to add to that.
We're going to take a break here in a second and kind of look bigger picture about what adding Jared Curtis means to Georgia, sort of what it means for the 2026 class. Before I do that, do either of y'all have any final thoughts you want to share on Georgia landing Jared Curtis and just sort of the Jared Curtis piece of this?
Well, I think it puts to bed for now at least a few narratives that there have been about Georgia. I mean, Georgia's struggled to get their top quarterback that they've gone after in the most recent recruiting cycles, and they corrected that in the biggest way possible in this cycle. I mean, there is no question who Georgia's number one quarterback target was from start to finish here, and they landed him today. So I think, that's one. And then just Mike Bobo in general. He got a recruit. He landed a recruitment. Look, for all the faults or complaints, whatever that there might have been about him, he built an unbelievable relationship with Jared Curtis and Jared Curtis's family. And I know we live in a recruiting world where people love to talk about NIL and rev share and money, and that's absolutely a piece of it. We're not going to say we talk about it on these shows just as much as anyone. So we understand that that's a piece of it. But the reality is old school recruiting things still matter, and building those relationships and where you're going to feel comfortable sending your kid to develop and play football for a few years. Like, these types of things matter. And ultimately, I think Mike Bobo deserves all the credit in the world for getting that job done.
The only thing I would follow up and say is credit to Mike Bobo, to Kirby Smart, the rest of the staff. I have to imagine they weren't thrilled when Jared Curtis and his family came to them and said, look, we're going to decommit. We're going to look around. We want to make sure that we feel comfortable with our decision. But to Georgia's credit, they stuck with it. They rode it out over the long haul to see, what Jared Curtis wanted to do. And, they deserve a lot of credit for staying patient. I think there was some more so from like Georgia fans. People were getting a little antsy of, all right, we're kind of riding this thing out into early May. Or are we going to be able to pivot to another quarterback if Jared Curtis goes elsewhere? Are we putting ourselves in a bad spot in the 2026 cycle because we are being patient? That patience, it paid off in a big way on Monday. And I don't think that Kirby Smart or Mike Bobo would have it any other way. Kipp, any parting thoughts on Jared Curtis before we go to break?
A lot of people are going to talk about, is he ever even going to play for Georgia? Will he get to Georgia? You got to pick a narrative. You got to pick a lane here. If he's not picking Georgia today, then again, it would be people talking about Kirby Smart's lost his fastball. Now he can't land elite quarterbacks. They got their guy today, and it's exactly what you want Georgia to do. You worry about that down the road. This is the kind of competition that Kirby Smart wants at every position. The narrative before last cycle, wide receiver, they've completely flipped that room around. A quarterback, they've got an elite quarterback on board. And so now I get, again, it's the offensive recruits, because everyone talked about, you look at the draft, it's elite defensive players. Where's the offensive guys? During that championship run, Georgia had elite offensive talent as well. So the story now moves to, they've got their quarterback. Can they start getting elite offensive tackles again?
All right, we're going to go to a quick break and come back and talk about, okay, Jared Curtis is a commit. What comes next for the Bulldogs? All right, Ben, when you talk about quarterbacks committing in any class, a lot of the time teams look at them as sort of that Pied Piper, that they are able to get other people to follow them. And we can kind of talk big picture in a few minutes, but I do want to kind of start with the next big target on Georgia's board, and that's Jackson Cantwell. Offensive tackle is going to be committing on May 13th. Do you think this recruitment and Georgia landing Jared Curtis has any effect with Jackson Cantwell? What's sort of your read of what Jared Curtis going to Georgia might mean in that recruitment?
Well, in traditional recruiting logic, I definitely think it helps. A quarterback wants to help recruit the big number one offensive tackle that Georgia's recruiting, and an offensive tackle wants to come play with a quarterback that it feels like is going to be able to champion it to winning football games. And so, yes, Jackson Cantwell and Jared Curtis would love to play with each other. In fact, I can say Tom Loy, 24/7 Sports national recruiting guy, he's in Nashville right now, and he's already sent me some of his conversation with Jared. And Jared even brought up Jackson and said that Jackson's a guy that he's already been in communication with. And so that's, something that has 100% happened. In new school recruiting logic, do I know financially how you make the number one quarterback and the number one offensive tackle, and Georgia wants to sign one of the best linebackers in the country and one of the best tight ends in the country and one of the best running backs in the country? Do I know how all of that works? No, that is way above my pay grade over here at Dogs 24/7. I will leave that to the people, making millions and millions of dollars to figure out how you navigate all of that. But yeah, there's no question that all attention turns to Jackson Cantwell, and that if Georgia gets Jared Curtis and Jackson Cantwell, that is massive from a recruiting buzz standpoint. It also probably alters what Georgia has to work with leading into the summer as well, which is probably a big reason why you're seeing a May 5th and a May 13th commitment date for these guys ahead of a lot of these official visits, where some very important conversations are going to have with their other primary targets.
Kipp, what's your read on that situation? Like Ben said, we're in an era now where you do have to kind of understand the financial resources that are required. But I have to imagine Jared Curtis, whenever all the hoopla kind of dies down after his commitment, I have to imagine he's going to be reaching out to Jackson Cantwell and trying to do a little recruiting for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, I don't know how much say you have as a high school recruit as to how a program uses its NIL budget. But if you're an elite quarterback, you're probably already just telling Bubba, hey, it'd be great if I had an elite pass protector. That would be a great use of, your recruiting budget. And he was going to disagree with that. I'm a Falcons fan. I'm already thinking about Michael Penix being a left-handed quarterback and looking at that right tackle spot and wondering, who's the best right tackle prospect in next year's draft? Who are the top free agents next year? Because you want to keep your franchise quarterback upright. So that is, you could talk about wide receivers all day, but you can bring in 8 to 10 of those guys. That left tackle should not be rotating much, because if he's rotating, then you're probably in trouble unless you got that great swing tackle that Georgia has had in previous years. So Jackson Cantwell making that commitment later this month is a great way to kind of keep the momentum going. I think as far as wide receivers, in state, Ryan Mosley coming to town, that's a great guy to keep an eye on, that I'm sure would love to catch passes from Jared Curtis as well. I think, getting him on board now, every offensive target, you just go to him and go, all right, here's your quarterback. This is the next phase of our program, potentially, at least in your class. And I think that's probably going to, move them up a peg with all the pass catchers. And for Georgia, maybe the running back position too gets a little bit more interesting, because now running backs in this cycle are commanding top dollar as well. So, how heavy can you go on offense if you're Georgia? I think we're going to find out, because there are some incredible running backs that this coaching staff is after right now.
Yeah, I have to imagine if Jared Curtis was not in some of these group messages with some of these Georgia targets, that has changed since Monday night. Ben, besides Jackson Cantwell, are there any other prospects in this 2026 cycle that you're kind of keeping an eye on now that Jared Curtis has committed? Any names that maybe we should keep an eye out for?
Well, there's a group of recruits that I've been told throughout the last couple of months are like associated with one another, I guess you could say. Like, I don't operate in package deals in this world, never have, especially don't now. But Vance Spafford, Lincoln Keys, Mark Bowman, Brett Colajay, is a group that they do some California Power 7-on-7 stuff together. They've gotten to know each other a little bit through some of these off-season training circuits, those types of things. And so as there has been some buzz generated around some of those names, and look, some of those names I just mentioned, Vance Spafford, Lincoln Keys, are already committed in Georgia's class. But, you look at a guy like Mark Bowman. Mark Bowman is another, we talked about Jared being priority number one at quarterback. it's hard for you to say that there's someone higher on your board than your clear-cut number one quarterback, but that's just about how how Georgia feels about Mark Bowman. I mean, they think the world of this guy. And so, again, we keep talking about the complication around the cap side of things, which again, I can't even begin to tell you right now what that's going to be. But if we're just talking about the players that Georgia really, really wants and that there seems to be a lot of mutual respect for, and that I think Jared Curtis's commitment is going to help for, Mark Bowman 100% falls into that category. So, I would say Jackson Cantwell, and like if Georgia somehow finds a way to land Jared Curtis, Jackson Cantwell, and Mark Bowman, they're going to come out of this recruiting class feeling like they 100% won in terms of how they manage things. And that might come with some sacrifices on the offensive side and even on the defensive side as well. Some guys that we've said for a long time, oh, this guy's probably going to end up at Georgia. This guy's probably going to end up at Georgia. They might not if you end up landing all three of those, but that's okay because Georgia, as we've said with Jackson Cantwell moving his visit around and, Jared Curtis recommitting to Georgia a second time, like Georgia still dictates things in these recruitments, maybe more than you would think. Like there ends up being so much nervousness and things like that on our boards. And just when you talk to Georgia fans casually all the time, but look, I mean, nobody operates in this world more efficiently, more effectively than Georgia does. And I think that has shown up today. And I think that has a chance to show up with guys like Jackson Cantwell and Mark Bowman in the future as well.
To your point, there's probably going to have to be some sacrifices made as far as who you can get and who makes sense financially. And two, the question that remains is when exactly this rev share is going to be put into place. We're still waiting on this House settlement to be approved. Still a lot of questions there. But Kipp, I have to imagine just if you're Georgia, you love the spot you're in right now. You've got that quarterback, as we were just talking about. You get to go out there and sell that, especially as far as you look at the offensive skill players. You've got your quarterback, and now he can go into recruiting mode too.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Boba is still fist pumping right now and telling Todd Hartley, like, okay, the ball's in your court. And Todd's just laughing like, I've done this before, like this isn't my first rodeo trying to bring in multiple elite targets in my position room. So I think you also have a coaching staff that's pretty well set up to capitalize on that success. And I mean, they're well positioned with a lot of offensive targets, which this was a cycle where they really needed to focus on that. So I think you look overall position room to position room. I think Georgia's in a really great spot. I think if you're going to have to make tough decisions, it's better that it be at the ones where you've recruited really strongly in previous cycles. You could take some guys that are developmental prospects. That's just the way that you have to look at it these days and start to look ahead toward, 2 cycles down the road. Are these guys that are going to stay in our program and that we can build upon? It's just a different evaluation process, but it's also one that I think Kirby Smart's really prepared his coaching staff for in that manner. And anytime, you talk to him this spring, he's saying as much is that, we got to find, he talks about the passion, fire, and spirit type guys. Well, they have to find those guys outside of just landing the no-brainer 5 stars. You just got to find guys that are willing to buy into the program and make that commitment, even though they're, they might not be at the top of the rankings, or they might be not at the top of the depth chart as soon as they get to Athens. It's just a different evaluation data point. And it's one that's really new. The one thing we're talking about is finding guys who love football. Well, that's a different kind of eval now that you're having to really figure out which one of these guys is having NIL at their fingertips in high school and still coming out and being passionate. And I think we're going to see that a month from now in the camps. When Georgia gets these guys in person, that's when the recruiting board's just going to change completely. A lot of guys not even being talked about right now are going to show up, and they're going to bump some other guys down the recruiting board. So if that's going to happen, I think the defensive side of the board is really where you'd want to trust Georgia's coaching staff with guys that they get to camp and evaluate in person.
It's going to be a fun upcoming few months as this 2026 class rounds out for Georgia. All right, guys, some parting thoughts before we end this episode. Just some final thoughts on Georgia adding Jared Curtis. Ben said this earlier. I mean, Georgia went and got its guy. And, whatever you think of Jared Curtis, whatever you think of his competition, very clearly, Georgia likes what they've seen in him as a prospect. They really like his potential and what he can develop into. And the point I made earlier in this episode, I would be really shocked if he winds up starting as a true freshman, but I really like his potential and I love the opportunity that he can get to come in, maybe sit for a year, learn with Mike Bobo and these quarterbacks. I think the future is really bright with Jared Curtis, and I think this is a worthwhile addition for the Bulldogs. Kipp, any final thoughts before we end this episode?
Yeah, this quarterback room is going to be really interesting. I think you look at Ryan Puglisi having the time in the system. This is going to be a huge fall for him. Ryan Montgomery, getting fully healthy, coming back from injury. Really like the quarterback room. Looking ahead to next spring, if there's going to be a freshman who's ready to step in and actually push for immediate playing time, it does set up pretty interesting for Jared Curtis, given the guys that he's going up against. I think a Mike Bobo's system is one that usually is going to give an advantage to people who have spent more time in it. But at the same time, I think Jared Curtis could still be the guy that kind of breaks that mold a little bit. It's going to be all about how well he handles that huge jump in competition, going from playing in Tennessee to competing in the SEC. But I do think that compared to other guys coming in as freshmen in the past, I think is his best positions that I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of them. I remember the Jacob Easons and the Justin Fields, all those recruitments, but this could be the one. I'll put my early bet in that I think Jared Curtis makes a big push to be Georgia's starting quarterback next year.
It's going to be something to follow for sure, and it's going to be very interesting. Well, Ben, we'll let you have the last word. I do want to say you've done a great job covering Jared Curtis's recruitment, and again, go check out Dogs 24/7. Ben's got a lot of content out of this commitment. Final thoughts before we end this episode.
Well, you say I've done a good job covering his recruitment. Fodder for the haters. I never had him in one of my mock classes. First mock class, I had Landon Duckworth. Second mock class, I had Bo Bentley. I just couldn't commit to the recommitment, but I will say the intel certainly favored Georgia in the final days and hours of it. And again, I've probably done enough Mike Bobo glazing for this episode, but I do think that he deserves the hat tip for some of the hell that he catches, and just that this was something that was critical for him to be able to do. And look, even with a down 2025, I think this buys him some time probably, because this is the most talented guy that Georgia's had in a little while. And so I think this is nothing but good news, and I'm interested. I'll say this selfishly, I'm glad Georgia quarterback recruiting gets wild. I hope that I'm not jinxing anything. I hope Jared Curtis just happily signs in December, no questions asked, so that we can, give some shine to some of the other position groups that Georgia's going to sign here. Because I know that anytime I wrote about anything for the last 2 months, it was just, what about Jared Curtis? What about Jared Curtis? So we'll do that for about a week with Jackson Cantwell, and then we can really get into the meat of the summer.
Yeah, you didn't have Jared Curtis in either of your mock classes. You also didn't have him in your predict to commit over on the Stay Woke episodes, but there was one person who did, and that was me.
That's true. I will say, shout out to us, both commitments in the last week. Both were on our predict to commit teams, so hopefully you guys are following along with those predictions as well.
Yeah, it's been fun, no doubt. Well, we will get ready to end this episode. I want to shout out everyone who watched this live. We got quite a bit of people who tuned in for a breaking news episode. I appreciate that. David Lee Sr., Jeff, EJ Clay, Motivated Dedicated, Jeffrey Rostick, Gary Holt, Donald Mole, Ray Downs, James Marable, Tom Stradley, Jonathan Guthrie, Stephen Ramey, Jeff Horton, Roy Gay, the infamous and invincible Cheap Toy Man, Eunice Norris, Brian Warren. That was just the folks that were in the comments. I know there were a lot more besides that. Thank y'all for watching this live. Thanks to everyone who was watching and listening to it after the fact. Go to dogs247.com. A ton of recruiting stories out of this commitment and more to come. and we'll continue having football stories and Georgia baseball as they continue right along. Ben, you got some
quotes from Jared Curtis at Dogs 24/7 within 20 minutes of us wrapping this up.
Beautiful. I mentioned Georgia baseball. They moved to #1 in America in Baseball America. So stay glued to Olivia Sayers' coverage there. She's done a great job covering the Diamond Dogs. Very much well worth it. Georgia basketball coverage too as they get ready for Mike White's 4th season. Go to our YouTube, Dogs 24/7. Subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcasts. We would surely appreciate that. And go to our TikTok. We will have some good content out of the Jared Curtis commitment that we will throw on there. So we will end the episode right there. For Ben Wolk and Kipp Adams, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.